Right. So next up, we have Meaghan Creech, who is URISE cohort 2 and is in Dr. Nicole Bull's lab at OHSU.
This presentation is on delta power during N3 sleep after dronabinol administration in both cannabis-naive participants and in participants who frequently consume cannabis. It's also presented in a poster with the same title. The key objectives here in this pilot study were to compare the effect of an acute dose of tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, on delta power in individuals who regularly consume cannabis compared to controls who are cannabis naive. Delta power by Fourier analysis is a marker of the quality of slow wave sleep, deep sleep. Greater delta power is associated with higher sleep quality. So here's where we get into the nitty-gritty of sleep. So we have all experienced doing homework, getting progressively more tired as the night goes on. As soon as you go to sleep, sleep pressure starts to drop. So you, within the first third of your sleep period, you will do most of your deep sleep. This is what slow wave sleep looks like for the most part, delta waves. So very low frequency, diffuse waveforms. The study design here was single-blinded, repeated measures, placebo-controlled. There were 9 participants in each group. One group is frequent cannabis use, which was defined by over 3 uses a week with a positive UA for positive urinalysis for THC metabolites. And cannabis naive was defined by less than 10 lifetime exposures with a negative urinalysis for THC metabolites. The ages were 26 plus or minus 4. And there was a placebo administered on the second night, and then 10 milligrams of dronabinol was administered before sleep on the final night. Results were significant, but only across the F3 to M2 lead, and only for the cannabis naive group. So the frequent cannabis users saw remained largely unchanged. It was not a significant change. And these are results averaged across leads and across all the bouts of N3 sleep that were bookmarked for each night. The significance of this research is that it suggests differential effects amongst naive and regular users following acute dosage, which could have implications for the habituation effects of cannabis for sleep. Future directions for this are to increase the sample size and add additional dosing considerations. And I would like to thank Dr. Nicole Bowles, Dr. Joshua Gonzalez, Dr. Shandy Dixon, the Oregon Institute of Occupational Health Sciences, and the Portland VA Healthcare System. I would also like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to LaTroy Robinson, Omar Ordez Johnson, Dr. John Emmons, and Dr. Stephen Shea, as well as URISE, OHSU, PSU School of Public Health, Build Exito, and all of the grants that fund my research. All done. Can you go back to your the slide after results? That's what I think. I welcome any questions. It was real hard to get this down to a type 5.
Any questions from Zoom? Feel free to put them in the chat box.
I have a question. Was there a specific age range for your?
Yeah. So 26 plus or minus 4 across all 18 participants. So they were within, what is that, 22 to 30. Sleep changes, like the visuals of EEG change across the lifespan. So when you're looking at something specific, you tend to want to like bin people into pretty tight age ranges to make sure that you're not picking up variables that you're not looking for.
Thank you. Why did you choose these age range?
So 26 plus or minus 4 puts us right in the range of like adult sleep. As you age, like infant sleep is crazy. Geriatric sleep is like both of those things are their own fields. Because the waveforms change so much. And you generally like, there will be less of this kind of sleep, more of that kind of sleep. So by sticking to like a pretty strict band of ages, we're looking specifically at like normal adult sleep. So that, yeah, again, that just eliminates like any age-related changes that you might see otherwise. And we also have a pretty strict inclusion-exclusion criteria. So there were other exclusion criteria that include, we have people like go through pretty extensive psychological testing to make sure that they will not be disturbed by in-lab conditions. They also have to register as like not above a certain level of discomfort in having to abstain from cannabis. So beforehand, they go through 2 weeks of sleep regularization, and then they're asked to abstain for 72 hours from THC before they get in lab. So by the end of the study, they have been, there's about a 6-day washout. So if someone was going to be in like severe withdrawal or discomfort from that, then they were not included.
Can you tell us more about the synthetic THC? Like what is that? Like how is that distributed or?
Sure. So this was an oral dosage. Dronabinol was patented originally for nausea reduction in HIV patients. So it is just THC. There are none of the other compounds that you might see in like naturalistic cannabis. And the oral dose, it was administered in a high-fat snack to aid absorption. And the placebo the night before was also administered in a high-fat snack to reduce the knowing it's a placebo effect.
Are you allowed to test using like liquid form or like where someone vapes it, or if someone uses flour, or are you using the internal so it goes through like the liver?
So we are not currently, because of the scheduling of cannabis federally, we're not currently allowed to like bring people in lab and dose them with cannabis. But we do have a study ongoing right now where we bring people in who are naturalistically using in their lives. And then we look at brainwaves, you know, like it just during the day. But looking at naturalistic use is a challenge in cannabis research, mostly because of the DEA scheduling.
I wish we could.
Yeah. Yeah, I do feel like that's usually what people want to know about, and I think that would be the more valuable, like public health information.
I think if you inhaled it, it'd probably have a more quick reaction, right? Compared to consuming it. Yeah,
there is sort of a curve for consumption, like orally versus inhalation. I don't think anybody's injecting THC.
I've never heard of that.
But I imagine each path, you know, each like mechanism of delivery has its own timing. And I know that like we could see the timing of onset for this dose of dronabinol, which is interesting.
Any questions? Any additional questions? Anyone from the Zoom? Okay. Let's give a round of applause for Meaghan. Thank you. All right, everybody, just want to introduce our next presenter, Gabriella Tangkilisan, who's also in Dr. Catherine's lab.
Morning, everyone. My name is Gabriella Tangkilisan. I am part of the Dr. Zuckerman lab. Today I'll be talking to you about the consensus recommendation for usability and acceptability of mobile health screening tools. Just for some background information first to get us started. Autism spectrum disorder is an early childhood neurodevelopmental disorder, and it has an estimated prevalence of 1 in 36. It used to be 1 in 44, I believe. Has increased a little bit. And mobile health autism apps, or more broadly called screening tools, those are brief tests to see if a child has symptoms of autism. And so they're usually used by parents or medical or health or educational providers. And they use it if they have concerns about a child's development. So they use it as more of like an initial starting point. It's not a diagnosis by any means, just to be clear about that. But it is a way for like the parent or the provider to like begin this. And these are some examples of the currently available tools. So you can see they're meant to be really easy to use and straightforward. They're supposed to be. However, what we have found in our interviews in our previous phases of our project, which I'll talk about later, what we found is that there are varying technological and content challenges that users have faced when they're using these tools, which is obviously not ideal. And so this entire mobile health project is meant to learn about the usability of these screening tools. And in our previous phases, we have interviewed health and educational providers, the tool developers, the actual people creating these tools, and also parents. And so now in this current phase of our project, we invited a multidisciplinary consensus panel to synthesize the original data a little bit more and really see what they agree on collectively regarding the screening tools, what can be changed to be better. And so the objective of this part is to create consensus recommendations for equitable design of autism screening apps and websites using the online panel of parents, autistic self-advocates, health and educational providers, autism researchers, and online screening tool developers. And these recommendations are changes to the screening tools that we're trying to change, right? And so how did we go about this? We invited 3 pediatricians, 2 tool developers, 3 early intervention providers, 3 autistic adults, and 4 parents. And for our design, we used a modified W process, well, I will talk about a little bit more in the coming slides. And we initially provided the panelists with preliminary design and recommendations that were from the previous research interviews. And they participated in 3 asynchronous rounds of online discussion and voting on Slack, and 1 live online video conference through Zoom. Providing more details on this, this was the initial list of recommendations that were presented to the panelists. There are 28 of these, and these were compiled based on the results of the interviews from the previous phases of our project. So themes based on what parents or medical providers said, or what even the tool developers themselves said. And these are just, this is the list that was presented that they would later vote on. And so for our modified Delphi process, it is a series of things. So first, the research team creates does the interviews and creates the list of guidelines, which we already did. And then this expert panel here, that's the consensus panel. There's a series of anonymous asynchronous ranking or voting, and then they would discuss the results of the voting. And so I did that 3 different times, and in this discussion, they can make comments on adding a recommendation, altering the wording of a recommendation, or make any other changes that they would like to see in the recommendations. Again, so they did that 3 times, and then they voted for up to 10 recommendations during each round, which is important. And then after all of the voting and discussion, they the research team then created the guidelines again, and in the video conference, all the panelists gathered together and made any final commentary on what they thought would be added. So these are just some examples from our Slack site. Obviously, we blurred the names of the panelists. And on the left side, that's an example of the voting. So we can see that 12 people voted for this recommendation and nobody voted for this one. So just narrowing down like what's most important, so that the tool developers can really understand what to make changes to. And this is an example of discussion as well. So the results, the consensus panel produced 19 final recommendations from the initial 28 preliminary in 5 conceptual categories: transparency, equity, access, product design, and user experience and development process. And these are the results. Apologize, it's a little scratched here, but I'll just highlight a few of them, and they're in their respective categories. And so some examples just include not including links to advertisements, clearly explaining its objective, or an equity reading level is less than or equal to 5th grade, so it's easy and then it's fast. Or for product design and user experience, avoid stigmatizing words, provide user support resources. You'd be surprised they don't actually always have them. So these are all of the examples. These are all the results. So finally, the conclusion and significance is if we can have direct impact from these individuals impacted by the current autism screening guidelines, then we can then create new guidelines that actually reflect the experience of the people that are using these tools. And then this can provide insight to future screen developers. And if we can do that, then we can improve the long-term impacts of early diagnosis for children with autism, especially families from low-income and minority communities who, generally speaking, suffer from the effects of like these guidelines. And I just want to say thank you to the members of the Autism Mobile Health Project team, some of which are here right now, and Dr. Catherine Zuckerman, laboratory team in general. Thank you. And thank you also to our funders and National Institute of Mental Health, Bill Exedo, of course, and National Library of Medicine. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
You said that the criteria went from 144 to 136. What happened for that to shift for those numbers to reflect more of a population?
Truthfully, I'm not a medical provider, so I can't provide like the more medical side answer to that. But what we have learned and seen is that there's been more training for medical providers, so they've been able to, I believe, diagnose this sooner. And so the results are reflecting the more accurate number of diagnoses that should have been occurring anyway prior to that. So that's my understanding. That's correct. She's a medical professional. She's in our lab.
What process did you use to select the panel of experts?
That's a very good question. Thank you for asking that. So we chose the panelists from the participants of the previous phases of the project. So they were already people that have provided input initially. And so we invited like other people too, but people who were interested in participating were the ones that we selected. So we just had a list of people from previous phases and decided this is who we put that in mind. Oh, that's fine. And she said that's me.
We have a question in the back.
Oh. Sorry,
I'm just pointing at you.
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, sorry.
I noticed some color coding in your materials slide, and I was just curious if there's significance to that.
Are you talking about the results or the?
No, the materials, I think it's before methods. Yeah, here, I was just curious if is this grouped by like subject matter or?
No, we just thought it would be fun to not have it be just white. I believe that's, yeah, there's no like significance, but
Does make it way easier to read, so thank you.
sorry, what was your question?
So that mobile app that's used for screening criteria, is that given through a provider or is that available to general public, or will that ever be available to the general public?
That's a good question. It's available to the general public if you look up, so the one on the right, that's called the MChat. If you look up MChat online, you'll find this. So it's available to the public, but what we're trying to learn in our study is how can we make these better so that it is usable by the more easily usable by the general public. There are some technology issues like, you know, people have an iPhone versus if they have an Android, there can be some.
You said it's M chat?
Yeah, it's called the MChat.
M chat, okay, thank you.
And as they are available to the public, and I saw in some of your, like, some of the narrowed down points of emphasis were like, it needs to be free, it needs to have clear, like, who's providing the funding for this. Are there ones out there that are like more commercial, that someone's trying to profit off of an early diagnosis of autism? Versus I would hope, I guess it's just me living in Wonderland, but that most of these would be free and would be for more of a altruistic purpose of actually trying to help people versus profiting off of it.
Yeah, so is the question asking if there are apps that require fees?
Right.
I haven't seen all of the apps truthfully, but from what we have seen in our study, there are some that do require. I believe so. I think there are some that might require fees. I think.
The CDC has one, and so you want people to go to the CDC, like when they Google.
Right.
You're right, you never know what's gonna come up, so, and program developers aren't required to talk to pediatricians or developmentalists when they make stuff.
In the chat, Dr. Zuckerman said that there's a lot of industry interest in the sector.
I don't want to sign. Okay. No. Here.
As a foundation. So I don't think you guys unfortunately have that was very exciting, but it was originally a Canva, so I'm gonna let that as a Canva. I don't know. So you can. That's why I converted it like back. Okay.
You have to play it. Yeah. Yeah, it's annoying. Okay, mine is 2. I think I love that. So I use PowerPoint. I wish I could log in. Yeah.
Wow, this is my point. Share it.
Yeah, share it.
Oh, okay, so you're fine. Yeah. Person I'm looking at.
Right. Yeah. What did they? It was like.
I did not know. I started to get really. It's like, okay.
Like less than an hour. These are copies.
Hey, welcome everybody for our last presenter for this room, at least for today. So I'm excited to introduce Shresta Anand, who's a part of Andrew McHill's lab at OHSU.
Hi, my name is Shresta. I go to Portland State University and I work in the sleep chronobiology and health lab at OHSU. And my research is about uncovering the effect of restricted sleep and circadian disruption on glucose tolerance and metabolic health. So the background of this research is that past studies have found that not getting enough sleep and having a disrupted circadian rhythm promotes obesity by impairing your metabolic health, which basically means that sleep-restricted individuals intake more calories than they are excreting. So this leads to weight gain and a positive energy imbalance. And these studies have also found that when sleep is restricted, the amount of time people are awake is increased and their hunger increases later in the day. Also, these individuals consume more of their calories from after dinner snacks. So the objectives of the study are that we want to assess the individual impact of forced asynchrony and sleep restriction on metabolic health, glucose tolerance, and patterns of food consumption. And we'll be doing this by examining participants' sleep times and eating patterns. And forced asynchrony is basically just misaligning someone's habitual sleep-wake time. And so our experimental model includes placing participants in a 14-day in-lab study where they will be living on a 20-hour day instead of a 24-hour day, and they'll be randomized into a control or test group. And the control group is when the participants will get around 8 hours of sleep compared to a 24-hour day, but the test group will be the sleep restriction group where they'll get around 5.5 hours of sleep. So this is the timetable model of the experimental design with the forced asynchrony protocol. On the left is the control group and on the right is the sleep restriction group. And it might be overwhelming, but I'll break it down for everyone. So the black lines are when participants are allowed to sleep, the opportunity to go to sleep. And the lines in between are the opportunity to be awake. And the red line is when participants' suspected circadian rhythm will happen, which is when we're going to be testing for their glucose with mixed meal tolerance test, which is basically we'll be giving the participants a meal that has a lot of carbohydrates to see how their glucose is affected by the study. And each day, the sleep-wake cycle is advanced by 4 hours, and there are 6 sleep-wake cycles in each period. And it's a 14-day study, like I said. And so what is going to be collected from the participants? We're going to be using saliva assays to see the presence of melatonin in the participants, blood samples for their mixed meal tolerance test, and the glucose test, like I was saying, and hormones such as ghrelin and leptin, which tell participants when they're hungry, and also endocannabinoids. And we'll be using monitoring machines such as EKGs for heart rate, blood pressure, PSGs for their brain waves. And before the in-lab study, they'll be wearing actigraph watches so we can learn their habitual sleep-wake times. And between each sleep-wake cycle, so between the black bars, when they'll awake, they'll receive breakfast, lunch, and dinner at about 130% more calories than their normal need, and they can eat as much as the food as they want. And also between each meal, they'll receive snacks, and we'll give healthy and unhealthy options, and they can eat as much as they want. And so the expected results for this study are basically that both participants in both the sleep restricted and control group will eat more food during their circadian evening, and this food will contain more carbohydrates. But the glucose tolerance in the treatment group will be lower than in the control group. And that's another working model depicting that when participants get restricted sleep, they have the ability to eat more food, which results in higher body composition, lower glucose tolerance, and lower cardiometabolic health. And so overall, this study is important to aid in creating interventions for people who are overweight and have health problems related to that, or people who are predisposed to being overweight and get health problems, and especially for night shift workers and people who stay awake in the nighttime and who have to disrupt their circadian rhythm to eat in the nighttime, because it's important to know how our metabolic health is affected by that. And so I would like to thank Exito and the Dream committee that I'm a part of for giving me the opportunity to work at an OHSU lab, and also the Sleep Chronobiology and Health Lab, and everyone is pictured over there, and especially my PI, Dr. Andrew McHill. And yeah, thank you for listening. Here's my contact information.
Any questions?
I have one. So what was the specific demographic you had for the subjects within the study?
Yeah, I didn't really talk about that, but we're looking at people between the ages of 18 and 40. And we want them to be considered healthy, so they don't have like many health ailments. And also, I think they should have a BMI of under 18. Because that's how my PI wanted it. So I'm new to this study, but if you have any questions, I can put you in contact with them.
Why are they on a 20-hour day rather than a 24-hour day?
I'm not exactly sure about that, but I know that we're looking at sleep restriction. So we're seeing how when people get less sleep, how their glucose and metabolic health is impacted. But that is a good question.
You said very specifically that you were offering healthy and unhealthy choices of foods. Why is that available? Does that not add additional levels of variance that you might not be able to measure accurately, especially if you're looking at so many different aspects of health, like metabolic rate, sleep, and you're also looking at different types of careers that could also have an effect? Like, is having so much food also like or having unhealthy food options and healthy food options, does that not add an extra level of complexity?
Yeah, so from my understanding, we're just allowing participants to show their food preference of what they want to eat. But that is a good question. It does add on more like factors into the study.
How many participants did you have? I might have missed this. And you got people to sleep for only 5.5 hours.
So this specific study hasn't been performed yet, but studies like it have been performed.
Okay.
I feel like we get around like 10 participants, but yeah, so I'm still new to the lab, but from what I've heard from the past studies is that they just like, they dim the lights. Also, it's the light in the room is always dim. So their circadian rhythm is just like, you don't know what time it is.
Yeah.
You don't know what day it is. So yeah, I haven't been like in the in-lab studies, but
Yeah, that's cool. That's crazy. Also, I was just gonna say that I didn't know that your melatonin levels could be measured by your saliva. I
yeah.
thought that was super cool.
Mhm.
That's it.
I imagine it may be challenging to recruit participants for your study. I'm a
Yeah.
social behavioral researcher, and even recruiting people for brief surveys is sometimes challenging, and this is much more demanding on their time. Do you have ideas about how you'll incentivize participation?
So participants are incentivized with monetary incentives, but other than that, it's just they get to see their data because they're participants. So I guess if you're interested in how your glucose is affected with the study, yes.
How much money is it going to be, do you think?
I don't know about this study, but previous studies have been around like 300.
Is there a difference in participants if you were to have someone who naturally worked or naturally had 8 hours of sleep and then they start the experiment versus some graveyard workers or some academic students who naturally are insomniacs? Is their body gonna like throw off the study? That like you have to do the adjustment correct versus having someone who naturally has 5 to 6 hours of sleep?
I'm not entirely sure, but I'm guessing there would be a difference between those types of participants, but I'm sure that we would account for that somehow. I would probably have to ask my PI to further elaborate, but that's a good question.
Any questions from Zoom?
Yes.
Do you know if you're incorporating metabolic measurements into this, like a basal metabolic rate or like the thermic effect of food to see how an individual's essentially that other side of the equation, how much calories they're burning influences Especially the potential weight changes during the experiment.
Yeah, I think we are measuring that. Like I said, I don't know the specifics, but I know that before the in-lab study, we do measure like BMI, weight, and fat percentage, stuff like that.
Fat percentage with like a DEXA scan or like to get muscle mass and.
I
fat
think
percentage?
so, yeah.
Questions from Zoom, so. So for this room, that concludes our presenters. I just want to say thank you for everybody that attended today as well as on Zoom. We also will be here on Thursday where we'll have additional presenters and then we'll also have poster presentations as well. So we look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Thank you.